Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Miska, Executive Director of First Amendment Voice. Are you concerned about the state of civil discourse in our country, or maybe even in your own community? If you want to help FAV bring programming like the discussion you're getting ready to watch to others, please consider going to our website at firstamendmentvoice.org and click on the Join tab. You can learn about the benefits of membership and become a part of a movement reinvigorating and understanding about freedoms of speech, religion, the press, assembly, and petition. And if you like our videos, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's First Amendment Voice, all one word, .org, O-R-G. Thank you, and enjoy the webinar. Welcome, everybody, to our celebration of Constitution Day. This year, we are blessed to have Jen Dulski joining us, and Lou Hanessian is going to facilitate a conversation with her and then open it up to Q&A down the road. But I do want to talk about the overarching symposium that we are hosting. It's 233 years ago today that the Constitution was ratified. And so for a lot of Americans, we don't think in those terms many times. And this year's theme is very appropriate as well, which is partly why we're doing it in the virtual medium. It is how the pandemic has impacted our First Amendment freedoms, our freedom to practice religion or express ourselves or assemble and petition the government for grievance. And many people think of those ideas in static terms, that they were written in stone 200 plus years ago and that they're fixed, but they're not. They ebb and flow with our society and our culture. And what better way to explore how change impacts them than to hear an expert in the technological space describe her experiences. And so we're super blessed. I do want to thank our audience for participating. I want to thank our volunteers for enabling this programming to take place, and our members who are the lifeblood of the organization. So thank you. And then a special thanks to Lou for being willing to come and interview Jen. I'm just excited to hear the conversation. You've been a wonderful contributor to First Amendment Voice with your ideas and your background, specifically in not just the media space, but a deep understanding of neuroscience and the interface between those two. So thank you so much, Lou. I will let you take it away.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Steve. It's been super exciting. Jen, I've been waiting for this. I'm super excited to see you. We're on two opposite coasts and time zones, so thank you so much for making the time. Before I read Jen's bio, and I'm going to read it because it's like a story, I am going to invite everyone listening to please begin from the get-go to formulate your ideas for questions. Please place them in the Q&A, not in the chat, but in the Q&A. They're being monitored, and when Jen and I kind of wrap up our section of this, probably in about a half an hour, we're going to go straight to questions, and the two of us are going to dive in and find the juiciest ones to answer. So Q&A, not the chat, and you can start as of now, just start thinking about it. So Jen, you're going to listen to yourself in the third person. Sometimes I wonder whether you read your bio and think, was that me? Like, it's like an unbelievable life. So Jen Dulski is the CEO and founder of Rising Team. Jen, I just got lost in the website. It's an incredible initiative. It's a leadership development and team building company that provides tools, data, and community to empower managers to build happier, more successful teams. Jen has deep expertise in leadership and community building, more than 20 years of experience scaling tech companies. So prior to Rising Team, Jen led Facebook groups used by more than 1.5 billion people every month to create and participate in communities. She served as head of groups and community at Facebook. She managed a team responsible for envisioning and building and growing the group's product. Before Facebook, she was president and COO of Change.org, the world's largest platform for driving social change. Under her leadership, Change.org grew from 18 million to over 180 million. Jen developed a profitable business model and rebuilt the technology to handle high growth, scale, and virality. And earlier in her career, Jen led one of 6 business units at Yahoo as the Group VP and GM of local and marketplaces. She became co-founder and CEO of the Deal Map, a location-based deals app that Google acquired in 2011. She became the first woman entrepreneur to sell a company to Google. Woot, woot. And yesterday, Jen started as a lecturer at the Stanford Graduate Business School for Business, which is very exciting, Jen. A Zoom lecturer. I'm sure you would have preferred to be there in person, but and I have to say before we dive in that Jen is the author of this bestseller book, Purposeful, an incredible book. As you can see, it's full of Post-its, but this book by Jen, I'm going to be quoting a few things from it as we go. But Jen, you know, I read your story and I wonder whether you go, oh yeah, I did those things, or whether you're just so in the movement of growth and change that I wonder if you even stop to think about what you've done.
Yeah, not much, to be honest. I think I'm mainly in the act of doing it. And,
right.
You know, when I look back on it, I think one of the things that I am most proud of is that I have been able to build a number of things that live on without me. And this is the thing about movements is, you know, when you start them well, you don't have to be there the whole time. So as an example, one of the things that isn't in my bio because it was so long ago is, you know, very early in my career, I started a nonprofit to help kids be the first in their families to go to college. And I actually taught high school during those years too. So this return to being a lecturer is very funny for me, getting back in the classroom. But, you know, I think about that program, which I started now more than 25 years ago, and getting it off the ground was really meaningful for me. And then I handed it over to someone else and it's still running, you know, 25 years later. And so thousands and thousands of young people have gone to college and have changed the path for their own life and their families. And I think that's what's so powerful about a lot of the stories that we're going to talk about today is, you know, you may spark something and other people may ignite the fire.
Well, I love that you talked about that because on page 53, you said movements are dynamic because they're driven by a vision with a purpose. So I'm wondering, to kick things off, you know, as a tech expert, you are a trailblazer, you are not just a global leader, but I think you personify what change maker is, or at least a change agent. You probably think of yourself as even a change facilitator. You're obviously humble, but you know the power of purpose. I mean, it's no accident that your book is called Purposeful. So what is the power of purpose now? At a time, at this unprecedented threshold, this crossroads where people either feel two extremes, extremely empowered or extremely powerless. So what's the power of purpose, you think, at a time when people are feeling kind of disoriented around power?
I mean, the thing about purpose is that it lifts us up. No matter whether we are really down or we're already feeling at the top of the mountain, purpose is the thing that takes us all higher. And I think why it is so front and center right now is because times really are difficult. I mean, we are living in a challenging time. So many people have lost their jobs. People are getting sick. We have, you know, injustice happening on the forefront. And what's happened is the combination of all those challenges, plus now having the technology to mobilize faster than we ever could before and to share our stories with each other more easily, I think has created this, you know, firestorm of purpose in so many people. And if you look at the examples, you know, one of the things I say a lot about purpose and about movements is that people imagine them when they're already enormous and successful. You know, you think about things like the Women's March or the Black Lives Matter movement, and they seem big. And a lot of us sit there and say, gosh, well, that's a huge thing. How could I do that? But if you backtrack to the beginning of those movements, all of them were started by regular people, just like you and me, who said, I'm frustrated with what's happening and I want to do something about this. So if you think, like, if you look at the Women's March as an example, that was actually started by a grandmother who lived in Hawaii named Teresa Shook. And she was frustrated in 2016. She said, I want to do something about this. And she just posted, she made a little event on her own Facebook page, and she wrote, I think we should march. And she sent it to a few of her friends. And the story is really interesting because she tells this story about how she posted this event and she went to sleep and she woke up and there were 10,000 people signed up to this event. And so you just never know. I think the same goes for the Black Lives Matter movement. There's so many individual people. Like one of the people I've met recently is a man named DeRay McKesson, who is a big activist in Ferguson and so forth. But now he is behind this huge movement around Campaign Zero. He started an organization called We the Protesters. And he's really central to this idea of how do we rethink police and the interaction between police and the community. And so that's the thing about purpose. It fires us up and it enables us to take these small actions that then, bloom into big movements.
So I love that. I love what you said about that, that woman who posted the 5 words, I think we should march, and how that sparked the change. You know something about tipping points for change, even how to quantify them or somehow at least how to analyze them. And I'm sure you've culled from all of the work that you did at change.org that there are tipping points for change. This idea of, change begins like this, right?
Yes, that's right.
Talk to us a bit about tipping points, what that means for you.
So as I mentioned, I think the thing that gets most people is that they think of movements as large when really they start small. So the first thing to keep in mind is that really small actions matter. Almost every movement starts with one post or one event page or one, starting of a petition and inviting one person. It is true that you can start to get a sense of when momentum is happening. And in tech, we love tipping points, and we look for the metrics and we analyze the data. So I can tell you, for instance, that if you're starting a community on Facebook, that communities that get 50 people within the first week are much more likely to become successful large scale communities. That's not to say, if you want to start a community among your, the parents at your kid's school or something, you want 50 people in a week. But if you're trying to create something large, there are those tipping point metrics like that. On things like petitions or even protests, marches, etc., the key thing around tipping points, I think, is when you can start to attract the attention of other supporters for your movement. Like when do you start to see growth around one person's coming and then another person's coming, and then that growth speeds up. And the second thing is about when you start to get the attention of the people you are trying to persuade. So as an example, every petition has a decision maker, the person that they are asking to take some kind of action. And some petitions, the ones that most people see, they often have hundreds of thousands or sometimes millions of signatures. Like the George Floyd petition had, 10 million signatures. But the truth is you don't need 10 million signatures to move most decision makers. And so I think the question is, whom are you trying to persuade? Sometimes it's the media, as an example. And as you know that world very well, sometimes just a few hundred signatures can get someone in the media to start to pay attention, write an article about what you're doing, and that becomes your tipping point. Other times you can get that attention of the decision maker. Let's say you're trying to persuade someone on your city council. Again, a few hundred signatures on a petition might be enough to cause that tipping point to get that person to take a meeting with you if that's what you want.
It's so interesting. As I'm thinking about what you're saying, I keep coming back to the emotional piece. And we all know that this is such a time of urgency, and there is so much fear in the air, not the least of which reasons is because we're surrounded by so much loss. There's so much collective grief and trauma of what we've been living through from a public health perspective. And so I'm just trying to think if you could pull together these levers of the harnessing the benefits of tech while also being educated to and aware of some of the threats to First Amendment rights through tech, for living in this disinformation era. But just this idea of urgency, right? You write about fear, which I think is so powerful. I love that, by the way, You people have to, I can't read you the whole book, but there's a very funny piece in here that I relate to about your love of acronyms. I love acronyms too, but you had an acronym in your house, which was, if I can do this, I can do anything, and the acronym for all of that. So there's this idea of like, if we can do this, if this country's movements and the people who are feeling this fear and kind of moving anyway, speak to us a little bit about how to reconcile these two things. There's this time of urgency. People feel like they're fighting for to preserve their democracy and constitutional rights. Let's say First Amendment rights, which is why we're gathered here. But they're also, I think, trying to look out for the other guy, the neighbor, sort of collective resilience and public health. So I just sort of talk into the void of that question a little bit. I'm sure you have a lot of
Yeah, I mean, I think as technology, like anything, can be a wonderful asset, and it can also be a liability at times. And I think what we're seeing though now is that technology is primarily an asset here, right? Like the things that you see able to happen right now. Again, we're in a world where everybody is stuck at home, right? So not only, it's normally when you see movement spark, it's people gathering. And of course, we have seen a lot of protests out on the street, especially a couple months ago. But if you look at the way those were organized, it was all organized through tech. How do you get people to mobilize? How do you get people to show up? And to be honest, I think it is part of the reason that we were able to mobilize so quickly around some of these things is because we all have a lot more time. So many people actually are not working or don't have a commute, don't have to be in an office. And so all of a sudden, the downside is there's so much loss and grief, as you mentioned. The upside is there's so much more flexibility to some of the things in our lives right now that haven't been there before. And so we can take that time and, take the downside of what's difficult and turn it into something positive, something where we can use our grief towards momentum of something we really care about. And the technology, I think, can really help do that. What I've seen when you look at the tech is that, while a lot of people focus on how tech pulls us apart, I've been able to actually see the best of humanity come out because of technology. So, I can tell you stories about things like, as an example, we talked about the fact that we both have young adult children, and, I'm a part of a community called Grown and Flown Parents for parents of kids who are that age. And, this is a time when parents and kids are separated from each other. They're off at school or they're working. And if something happens to your child when you're thousands of miles away from them, it's a really scary time. And it used to be that unless you knew someone who lived right there, there was really nothing you could do. And especially in a time like this, when it's much harder to fly and, get around and so forth. And instead, what happens is if something happens, like I've seen people post into this group, my daughter was just in a car accident and I'm thousands of miles away and I don't know what to do. And within minutes, you see people posting, I live 20 minutes from there. I will be at the ER. I'm a nurse. And, you just see the things that technology can enable, both in these movements and in the one-on-one relationships between human beings that I think make it a really powerful tool.
I love that you said it that way. And I keep thinking of you and your deep experience. The DNA of community. I mean, you have led groups in the subject of groups. You understand why people gather and how to harness the best of why people gather. And given that we're in isolation, given that fear is in the air and fear is contagious and we're neurobiologically wired to connect, I love this idea of you saying and feeling hopeful about us turning to each other, that connection and this idea of using tech to connect is maybe our saving grace here. But I wonder whether you think that might be a pathway of exploration for how we maybe bridge the chasm across trust and mistrust. Like, how do we cultivate trust in an era where we can't all agree on what's true? How do we use our deep DNA for connection and then the ability to connect across tech to kind of address that?
Yeah, it's so interesting. This is, I mean, you are right that this is a time when we are more pulled apart than we ever have been before. And it is true that tech can cause some of that to happen. And my belief is that what we need to do is each look inside ourselves, right? So one story that I like to tell here is, and there's a person featured in Purposeful named Derek Black, who was actually formerly one of the sort of preeminent white supremacists in our country. And he tells his personal story of how he actually changed his mind around those ideas and the people who helped him as part of that process. And really what it was deep empathy and understanding. So if we can think about how do we each start from a position of not believing that everything we know is true. As you say, truth is one of those things that we're all searching for, but it is sometimes not clear what that is. So when I talked to Derek about this one day, we were talking about polarization, and I asked him how he would define what polarization is. And he said he sees polarization as the lack of willingness to accept any doubt that I might be wrong. And
Ooh,
so
great. Let's say
yeah,
that
it's
again.
a little, it has a couple double negatives in there,
Let's
but
say that again.
quoting him exactly. So
Yeah.
the lack of willingness to accept any doubt that I might be wrong.
Mm.
And so I really started thinking about that and saying, you know, do I have enough doubt in my life? Because it's the certainty that I'm right that causes me not to listen to other people's perspectives and views.
I love the distinction of doubt and fear. Do I have enough doubt in my life? Doesn't mean you have to be afraid.
That's right. And actually I was thinking about this, and one day I was listening to the radio and they were announcing some kind of report that was coming out. And, you know, in my mind, I could feel myself thinking, I know what I think about this report already. And then I thought about Derek and I thought, maybe I don't. Maybe I should just say, what if I just listened with an open mind to all perspectives here? And I got to hear Van Jones speak the other day, and he was talking about what he calls 21st century listening. And the idea that in this moment, what we really need to do is deeply understand each other's experiences. And this is one of the things about movements that sometimes people struggle with is, what is it okay, which movements is it okay that I get involved with, right? So the other reason people don't get started is because they believe they don't have permission. And we're at a time where that's really critical, especially when so many things are happening around race and LGBTQ status and so forth. People are unsure whether it's okay for them to use their voices in a place where they aren't personally affected. And my answer is always yes. Like, I think the key thing is that movements need starters and they also need followers and supporters. And so probably they're right. You shouldn't be the one starting the movement if you're not authentically affected by the issue at hand. We should be amplifying the voices of people who are. But it is absolutely okay and necessary for us all to be supporters of the movements we believe in, whether we are personally part of that group or not.
Is that part of why this movement now, this movement culture is so unique? Is that part of what makes it unique right now, that we have this kind of unprecedented opportunity to do this 21st century listening?
I think so. And I don't, to be honest, I don't think enough of us are doing this yet. I think people tend to jump in and have their opinions very quickly, and that this is actually one of the things technology encourages, is everybody to speak right away. And I do think speech is important. That's what we're here to talk about. I would also posit that listening to others' speech is really important, and that we should be spending more time listening to each other. And perhaps that is what the pandemic is offering us, a little bit of extra time to do, is be listening to each other.
That's such a powerful invitation for all of us, the way you put that. It's really interesting. So I want to jump to questions in a minute, but maybe just to wrap up this section, Jen, First Amendment voice talks about finding our voice and certainly using our voice. And since you just invoked that phrase, I'm curious to know your insights around the voice, right? This use of our voice as a conduit to what, right? A conduit to, I'm just curious to know, how do you see the voice, given that we've just been talking about being purposeful, the voice's purpose or something around that?
Right. Yeah, I guess what I believe here, and we didn't talk about it directly, but I now coalesce the book into what I call the 3 C's. I wish I came up with this after doing so many book talks about the book. I hadn't really thought about it at the time, but basically, I think for people to be successful at using their voices to spark these kind of movements, there's basically 3 things they need to do. One is to have the courage to get started. And this is where most people fall down. And it's scary to use your voice and to speak up for something you believe in. I describe it a little bit like, it's like starting a standing ovation for a show that was just pretty good. It's like, it's not like standing up at Hamilton where everyone's going to stand up with you, but it's like standing up where you're not sure anyone else.
Hamilton, for example.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And it's scary because you're asking people to join you in something and you're not sure they will. But the truth is, it's okay if they don't. Sometimes you have to try multiple times, and sometimes you're standing there alone, and that's where the fear, getting over the fear part is important. And yeah, I didn't talk about the acronym you mentioned before, but I call it ICTICTA. If I can do this, I can do anything.
Right.
Yes. And
so
we can
turn to the W now. If we can do this,
that's right. I love it. I'm going to have to figure out what that
change the acronym. A little bit of an adjustment, 21st century adjustment. Yeah.
That's right. And I think, the idea here is that if we do things that scare us, it makes other things less scary in comparison. So in terms of, maybe it is scary to use your voice for certain things. So maybe start smaller, just start with posting something to your family and seeing how that goes, and then work up from there. Although maybe family is not the best place to start. But so that's the first C is courage. Yeah. The second C is community. We can't do this alone. Even though individuals or small groups get it started, we need to build community around us to invite others to help, to accept their help when they offer it. And the third C is commitment, because it's always true that there are obstacles and ups and downs along the way. And the people who are really successful are the ones who just keep going no matter what is happening. And that's true around using your voice. I think what we talked about listening is important too, because it's not just enough to commit to talking and talking and talking. You have to commit to making it a conversation.
Yeah, that's that grit piece. It's like, so the courage is like to spark something even as you sort of assessing the risk, doubt, fear. Courage is like, I'm going for it. And then that connection piece of the buy-in with others, but also that trust factor, right?
That's right.
And then that commitment, it's like, we're staying the course. Staying the course, because that's the purpose piece, right? That's the vision with a purpose.
Right. And it's all right. Yes, exactly. You got it.
That is so wonderful. I'm sure we're going to come back and wrap up with some final insights, but let's go to the Q&A, Jen, because there's a few questions here. I'm going to let you choose one you like, because they kind of go from contextual to philosophical.
Yes, let's see.
What do you think?
I mean, I'm also fine to just start at well, let's see. Let's look at this question. Can you listen but not hear? Because I like this question. Absolutely, you can listen and not hear. And this I think was the idea behind 21st century listening, was that it's not just about, sure, I'm gonna listen to what you say, but I'm actually going to try to take in what you're saying, understand your experience, try to feel what it might feel like to live your experience. And and it's not, in that case, it wasn't even about talking back or a conversation. It was really just about, how can I hear you. So I think that's a really good distinction.
That's like an empathic listening without spilling into empathic absorption, this kind of empathic distress where we're not listening anymore because we're so absorbed in the other person's plight. That is such an interesting thing for all of us to consider. How do we listen?
Right. And not trying to think about how you want to respond, right? The idea is that I don't have to be listening to be preparing my response. I am listening just to hear you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That receptivity.
Yeah.
This is an interesting one, Jen, because we talked about sort of the grit, the commitment piece. Can you articulate some of the attributes of that person who, despite the challenges, right, despite where we are right now at this intersection of all this crisis, keeps going? So what, I guess, speaking about the commitment piece.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I actually wrote a piece about this called "What Type of Crisis Responder Are You?" Because I think, just having lived through many crises, a lot of which happen inside organizations, but now we're living through a sort of cultural crisis altogether. My hypothesis on this is that there are 4 types of crisis responders in any crisis, similar to what you see actually among real crisis responders in natural disasters and things like that. And first, I want to say hats off to those people, because, to the rest of us responding to crisis, most of the time, it's not life and death, although in COVID times, maybe it is. So the way I think about it is that there are what I call firefighters, people who respond to crisis by taking action. They want to see the fire, put out the fire, immediately take action. Those people are committed in that way. There are what I call fire inspectors. So people who want to understand why things caught on fire in the first place and change processes and systems so that they don't catch on fire again. The third type is what I call EMTs. These are the people among us who see a crisis and say, how do I take care of the people in this crisis? How do I make sure that people have what they need, that they're fed, that they're being given community, et cetera? And then the fourth type is what I call the doomsayer. And these are the people who are not usually as successful in managing a crisis because they see it coming and then they just think, oh my gosh, it's going to get worse. My neighbor's house caught on fire. That must mean mine will, and the whole block will, and so forth. And of course, this example is hits very close to home to those of us in California, where we really are having everyone's house catch on fire. So sometimes the doomsaying is valid and is actually truth about what's happening, but most of the time there is a way to put yourself in the mode of one of the other 3 types or some of each of the other 3 types. Can I fix it? Can I figure out what's causing it and help prevent it in the future? Or can I help support people through this crisis?
That's so interesting. My goodness. I could talk to you for an hour about what you just said. But anyway, let's look at what Mary Townsend says here. Mary says, how can that concept of holding a more curious mind be centermost in public media? So
do you want to answer that because you've been a member of the media for a long time?
I'd love you to answer it, because I think that everything you've done in the tech space is very much about public media. So I guess this idea of things have become kind of siloed in the polarization era. I think that curiosity is something. I mean, you talked about courage and community and commitment. There's certainly maybe a thread that pulls those together with curiosity.
Yeah, I also think what I said earlier about doubt is highly connected to curiosity, right? So maybe I'll tell a personal story here. I think the question talks about the public media, and I think my view on that is actually that I would like to see the public media be more curious and be more open. It does seem like right now we're in a world where much of our media is also polarized, which makes it challenging, because then it's hard for people who are seeking, more open opinions and want to be curious, when all day long your cable news, whichever channel you're watching, is in one direction and one direction only. It makes it challenging, I think, for most people. I do think that what technology has done is allowed way more voices to speak up. And so one thing that we can do is consider a broader view of the public media. And there are people out there, if you look hard for the right sources and open yourself up to a wider array of sources. I was going to tell a personal story about, how are we doing on time? Because
we have 10 minutes. So
okay.
you tell your story and then maybe we can wrap up with
this is just an example of how keeping an open mind can sometimes really be, provide amazing experiences. So while I was working at Facebook, I had a group of pastors come in one day because they wanted to talk about how to help create their communities online. And we were talking about that with them. And I am Jewish myself, so I'm familiar with other religions, but that isn't personally my religion. And when I went in to meet with them, I was actually having a really hard day because I had just gotten a text right before that the high school that my younger daughter was in was on lockdown because there was a possible shooter in the neighborhood of the school. And I was just so shaken by that. And so I felt like I had to say something because I wasn't really on my game to kind of give them the call, which I would, about how to create online communities. And I told them this, and one of them looked at me and he said, "Can we pray for you?" And I had this moment for, myself, because in the Jewish religion, that isn't really that common. You wouldn't really do things that way. We don't have that exact concept. And so I had that question for myself: could I be open to this? Could I welcome a perspective of someone else that is very different than my own in this moment in time? And I said, table, and put their heads down and talked in prayer about what they hoped for my daughter and her school and so forth. And it was honestly one of the most powerful moments of my life, because that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't said, let me just be curious about what this experience that I have never had might be like. And so I think if we can all try to open ourselves up to, because some of these things can be so polarizing, and religion is one of them, actually. And so I just think there's room here. And beyond what the public media does, there are so many individual voices. Like, I have a friend who has created an organization called Tea with Strangers, which is all about how do you get together and have like real deep conversations with other people you don't know, who aren't like you, who don't share your opinions. There's another organization called Make America Dinner Again that brings people together. And so those are exactly.
That's what's for dessert, actually.
Yes, right.
We have a question here speaking about what you're talking about. How do we get back to more personal relationships because of what technology has taken away? I wonder whether I'd love your take, maybe a brief answer, and then I'd love to wrap up with a final question from me to you. Is do we really need to see technology as having taken something away, or do we need to change our relationship with technology, because technology is such an integral part of our lives? I think sometimes we personify technology like it's a big boogeyman that's doing something to us, but in fact we're using it, right? So your thoughts on that, just briefly. I know we don't have much time.
Yeah, I mean, it's all in how you use it. And I see so many examples. Just a recent example from the past few weeks, here we've been facing all these wildfires in California. There was a family, two families that had to evacuate their homes in Santa Cruz. They posted in our local moms group and said, we're moving, we lost our houses, we don't have anything, is there anything you can bring over? And again, this is a time where we can't be together physically a lot, but as an example, my husband and I, we have a tiny kids table and chairs sitting in our basement that, we're maybe waiting for the day at some point when we have grandchildren. And so, I said, do you want us to bring this over? And we drove over there. Everyone's wearing masks. We brought this table and chairs. They have between them 6 kids who were all just sitting on the floor playing because they have no furniture. And all of a sudden now they had a table and chairs. And again, I would really never have known they needed that without technology. And so it's really all in how we view it. And I think we have to be the arbiters of how we use it. And if we find ourselves getting, scrolling through things that make us unhappy and depressed, we should stop. And we should try to use it in more productive ways.
Well, it's that self-awareness piece. In a way, that is a part of cultivating our courage and developing that connection with ourselves, never letting anything get in the way of that connection, but using it to enhance it. We have about 5 minutes left, and I do want to end with a fantastic quote from your book. But before I do that, can we just touch on, maybe in a way to kind of spark some thinking out there among the people who are listening? First Amendment rights. We are gathered today for this symposium to kind of really think about these things. So I'd love your take on, as somebody who's a writer and a leader and somebody who's very cognizant of the power of words, just in protecting free speech and in protecting a free press and in protecting our rights to assemble, et cetera. What are the power of words, and how do we harness them for good?
Yeah. I mean, this is the question of our time, I think, because, as I said, especially with technology, it's so much easier now for people to use words and spread them more widely than they ever have before. And in general, I think that's a really good thing. It gives voice to the voiceless. It amplifies the voices of people who could never have that podium before. And I think it's an equalizer for the most part, which is really excellent. And it does allow for all of this connection, mobilization, movements, and so forth. It also has a dark side. And, I had to deal with this both at change.org and at Facebook. And it's something that is a real struggle. Like, how do you balance the need to really protect free and open speech with the idea that some speech actually causes harm? And so I think what the platforms are trying to do is to say, let's try to draw the line around things like hate speech and inciting violence and so forth. And for instance, at Change, what we did was, if something violated our guidelines, we removed it. But if it didn't, even if people didn't like it, we left it up. And we would say to people, start a counter petition. Like, this is what you do with your voice. If you don't like what someone else is doing, say something in return. And that, I think, is the power of what happens here. The line around exactly what misinformation leads to harm and so forth is very hard to navigate. And I've spent a lot of time on that. We could do a whole another panel on that.
Oh, goodness. And we will be doing that from now for the foreseeable. I love what you just said, because it ties into exactly what I want to read, which is really, what is our impact? What is the impact of our words? What is the impact of our actions? And I wonder whether we could even ask ourselves every day, what impact am I making in what I'm saying, for good and for bad? Knowing whether we've had an impact on others is not the point, writes Jen Dulski. Living life in pursuit of positive impact is what matters. A life of purpose, a life of service, and a life driven by hope. We've seen the power that can come from those who step up to start movements, and from the large numbers of people who support them. New purpose-driven companies, new ideas and approaches within state organizations, new policies and laws that create a better world for all of us. And Jen's 4 words for us: now it's your turn. So Jen, I just want to say, I take such courage from your work. I hope to stay in touch with you. I'd love to talk with you again. And I'm just going to give you the floor for the last minute to just say what's on your mind and what you'd like to say. We're just thrilled that you've been able to join us for the symposium.
Yeah, I thank you for having me. And I feel the same way. It's been wonderful to have a conversation with you. And thanks to everyone for the really great questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. I think the thing that I would like to close with is, you had a question that we didn't get to about values and about, how can we center on the values that connect us rather than divide us? And I really do believe, if you look at the research, for instance, that they do with people who are dying, that at the end of the day, we are all truly connected by the same values. I call them deathbed values. Like, you know, at the end of the day, nobody says to themselves, I wish I had one more car,
Right.
or I wish I was on one more board.
That's
They
right.
say, did I spend enough time with the people that matter to me? Did I leave a positive impact on the world?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the question to ask ourselves every day.
Jen's book is purposeful. Jen Dulski, thank you so much for being with us and for the work you continue to do in the world. We're really grateful.
Thanks so much, Lou.
And everybody's question we didn't get to, we will get to them in I guess by email, check newsletters. I think Steve Miska is going to come back and explain a little bit of that procedure. But we are wrapping it up. So thanks so much for everybody who joined us here on this conversation.